She pulled out her phone and showed him the Forbes cover, her face next to the headline "Youngest Black Woman Billionaire Saves 100,000 Lives." Then pointed at the hot dog vendor living in his van and said, "None of this exists without you. You saved my life with your last $20. And I've been looking for you for 7 years." The crowd filming couldn't believe what happened next. She pulled out keys to a brownstone worth $8 million and placed them in his weathered hands while he sobbed like a child. The Hermes heels clicked against the Manhattan sidewalk with a rhythm that made everyone turn. But it wasn't the shoes worth more than most people's cars that stopped traffic. It was the woman wearing them dropping to her knees in front of a hot dog cart while tears streamed down her face. Amelia Hartley, 28 years old and dressed in a crimson Valentino dress that caught the morning sun like liquid fire, reached out with trembling hands toward the vendor everyone else walked past without seeing, and spoke 5 words that would change both their lives forever. "You once saved my life." The vendor, Thomas Chen, stood frozen behind his battered cart with its peeling yellow paint and crooked umbrella, a plastic-gloved hand still holding the tongs he'd been using to turn breakfast sausages. At 32, with tired eyes and shoulders that carried the weight of too many 14-hour days, he looked at the woman kneeling on the filthy sidewalk in her $10,000 dress and couldn't process what was happening. The crowd of morning commuters had stopped their march toward Wall Street offices, phones already out and recording, as this elegant black woman in designer everything knelt before a white street vendor whose entire net worth was probably less than her handbag. "I'm sorry," Thomas stammered, his Boston accent thick with confusion. "I think you've got the wrong person. I've never seen you before." But even as he said it, something flickered in his mind. A memory of rain and darkness and choices that had seemed insignificant at the time but apparently had meant everything to someone else. Amelia rose slowly, her dress now bearing the grime of New York concrete, mascara running in streams that she didn't bother to wipe away. 7 years ago, November 15th, the Manhattan Bridge, 2:43 in the morning. Each detail was delivered with the precision of someone who had replayed a moment 10,000 times, who had built their entire life around a single act of kindness from a stranger. "You were wearing a Yankees cap and a green jacket with a tear in the left pocket. You saved my life, and you never even knew my name." If you've ever wondered whether a single moment of compassion can echo through years and change destinies, this story will show you that kindness is never wasted, that the smallest acts can have the greatest consequences. Take a moment to subscribe to Acts of Depth, where we share stories that remind us of our shared humanity. And remember that sometimes the person everyone ignores is the hero someone else has been searching for their entire life. Thomas's hands began to shake as the memory crystallized, pulling him back to that night 7 years ago when he'd been 25 and working 3 jobs just to make rent on a studio apartment in Queens. He'd been walking home from his night shift at a warehouse, exhausted beyond measure, when he'd seen her, though he hadn't known it was her, hadn't known she had a name or a future or would one day kneel before him in designer clothes. All he'd seen was a young woman standing at the edge of the bridge in the rain, staring down at the dark water with the kind of stillness that made his blood run cold. The morning crowd around the hot dog cart had grown to dozens, then hundreds, as word spread through social media that something extraordinary was happening at the corner of 5th and 42nd. But neither Amelia nor Thomas noticed the cameras, the whispers, the speculation. They were locked in a moment 7 years in the making, 2 strangers whose lives had intersected once in darkness, and were now meeting again in the full light of a Manhattan morning. "You talked to me for 3 hours," Amelia continued, her voice steady now despite the tears. "You told me about your sister who died of cancer, about how you dropped out of college to take care of her, about how you worked 3 jobs but still fed stray cats behind your building because everything deserves kindness. You gave me your last $20 for a cab home and your phone number in case I ever needed to talk. You saved my life with nothing but words and kindness, and I've been looking for you ever since." Thomas remembered now. Remembered the girl in the soaking Columbia University sweatshirt who'd been standing at the bridge's edge. Remembered the fear that had driven him to approach despite his exhaustion. Remembered talking until his voice was hoarse and the sun began to rise. He remembered giving her money he couldn't afford to lose and watching her get in a cab, wondering if she'd be okay. never imagining she'd become anything more than a memory that sometimes visited him when he saw young people looking lost. "I told myself I'd find you when I'd become someone," Amelia said, pulling out her phone and showing him something that made his knees buckle. It was a Forbes article with her picture and the headline, "Amelia Hartley, 28, becomes youngest black woman to build a billion-dollar tech company." Below, it was another headline from the Wall Street Journal, "Hartley Technologies revolutionizes mental health care, saves estimated 100,000 lives." The crowd gasped collectively, recognizing her now, the entrepreneur who'd been on every major news outlet, the woman who'd built an empire on an app that connected people in crisis with immediate support, the billionaire who'd pledged to give away 90% of her wealth to mental health initiatives. And she was kneeling in front of a hot dog vendor, claiming he'd saved her life. "Every line of code I wrote, every pitch I made, every time I wanted to give up, I thought about the stranger who stayed with me on the worst night of my life," Amelia continued. "I built my company because you showed me that strangers could care, that help could come from anywhere, that kindness didn't require wealth or status or anything except choosing to see someone else's pain and doing something about it." Thomas's eyes filled with tears as the magnitude of what she was saying hit him. He'd spent 7 years barely surviving, working food carts and delivery jobs, sleeping in a van for 2 of those years when he couldn't make rent, always wondering if his life had meaning, if he'd ever amount to anything more than another invisible person serving food to people who didn't see him. And now this woman, this billionaire, was telling him he'd been the foundation of an empire built on compassion. The video of Amelia kneeling before Thomas had already garnered 2 million views in the first hour, but neither of them knew it as they stood on that Manhattan corner, oblivious to everything except the impossible synchronicity of their reunion. Thomas had removed his plastic gloves and stepped out from behind his cart, standing awkwardly as if unsure whether he was allowed to exist in the same space as someone who wore diamonds in daylight. "I need to tell you what happened after that night," Amelia said, and her voice carried the weight of 7 years of transformation. "I was 21, a junior at Columbia studying computer science, and I'd just been told that my scholarship had been revoked due to a clerical error. My father had died of COVID the year before, my mother was battling lupus, and I'd been working 4 jobs to pay for her medication. That night, I'd received an eviction notice, a rejection from every loan application, and a diagnosis that my mother's condition had worsened. I couldn't see any way forward except off that bridge." Thomas listened with the same intensity he'd shown 7 years ago, his weathered face reflecting every emotion as if her pain was his own. Around them, the crowd had gone silent, phones still recording, but their owners transfixed by a story that stripped away the glossy veneer of success to reveal the human struggle beneath. "You didn't just talk to me," Amelia continued. "You shared your own pain. You told me about watching your sister Emma fade away, about holding her hand when she was scared, about how you'd sold everything you owned to pay for experimental treatments that didn't work. You said something I'll never forget. Pain isn't permanent, but leaving is. And everyone who loves you would trade everything they have for 1 more minute with you." The memory was so vivid that Thomas could taste the rain from that night, could feel the wind cutting through his thin jacket as he'd stood with a stranger and shared the grief he'd never told anyone else. His sister Emma had been 23 when lymphoma took her, and he'd spent every day since wondering if he could have done more, saved more money, found better doctors. Talking to that girl on the bridge had been the first time he'd admitted out loud that he'd wanted to follow Emma into whatever came after. "After you put me in that cab, I went home and wrote code for 16 hours straight," Amelia said, pulling up something on her phone. "I created the first version of what would become Safe Harbor, an app that connects people in crisis with trained volunteers who've survived similar experiences. The first volunteer I ever registered was someone I called Bridge Walker. It was you, or at least everything you taught me that night." She showed him the app's interface, where a small icon of a bridge appeared next to a counter showing the number of lives touched, 2.7 million connections made, 100,000 confirmed interventions, 15,000 volunteers across 50 countries. At the bottom was a dedication he'd never seen. 4TC, who saved a stranger in the rain and changed the world without knowing it. Thomas's hands trembled as he processed what she was showing him. Every major tech publication had covered Safe Harbor's rise, how it had revolutionized crisis intervention by connecting people not with clinical professionals, though those were available too, but with others who'd survived similar struggles. The military veteran considering suicide could talk to another veteran who'd stood at the same precipice. The student overwhelmed by debt could connect with someone who'd navigated the same pressure. It was peer support elevated to an art form, powered by AI that could match people within seconds. But that's not all, Amelia said, and now her voice took on the tone of someone delivering a confession. I need you to understand what you really did that night. The $20 you gave me? I used it to buy coffee and stayed up all night in a 24-hour diner. Coding. The phone number you gave me? I never called, but I kept it as a reminder that someone cared. And your story about feeding stray cats? That became my first investor pitch. I told venture capitalists that if a man working 3 jobs could find resources to help stray cats, surely billionaires could find resources to help struggling humans. A woman in the crowd started crying, and the sound triggered something in Thomas. He remembered those cats. 7 of them that lived behind his building in Queens, surviving on scraps until he'd started buying cat food with money he should have saved for himself. 3 of them were still alive, still coming to his van where he now lived, still trusting him to show up with food despite his own struggles. Mr. Chen, Amelia said, using his name for the first time, and Thomas startled because he couldn't remember telling her his last name that night. I've had private investigators looking for you for 3 years. I knew you were from Boston, worked multiple jobs, had lost a sister named Emma, and fed cats. That's all I had to go on. Do you know how many people match that description? How did you find me? Thomas asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Amelia smiled, the first genuine smile since she'd approached his cart. I didn't. The universe did. I was walking to a board meeting this morning, running through a presentation about expanding Safe Harbor internationally, when I heard someone at your cart mention their sister going through chemo. You responded with the exact words you'd said to me, cancer takes a lot, but it can't take love. That stays forever. I knew it was you before I even saw your face. The crowd around them had grown to fill the entire intersection, traffic rerouted by police who'd arrived to manage what was becoming a major event. News vans were pulling up, reporters pushing through the crowd, but there was something sacred about the bubble that seemed to exist around Amelia and Thomas, as if the universe itself was protecting this moment of reunion. I need to tell you something else, Amelia said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a worn piece of paper, laminated to preserve it despite its tears and water stains. It was a receipt from that night, November 15, 2017, from a Brooklyn cab company, showing a $20 fare. I've carried this every day for 7 years. It's been in every boardroom, every investor meeting, every code review. It's my reminder that kindness is currency, that strangers can be angels, that $20 from someone who has nothing is worth more than millions from someone who has everything. Thomas looked at the preserved receipt, this artifact of a night he'd almost forgotten, and something broke inside him. The tears came suddenly and without warning. 7 years of struggle and loneliness and wondering if he mattered pouring out in front of hundreds of strangers. His shoulders shook as he sobbed. This grown man who'd held everything inside since Emma's death, who'd worked 18-hour days and slept in his van and never complained because complaint felt like weakness and weakness felt like failure. I'm nobody, he whispered between sobs. I sell hot dogs. I live in a van. I couldn't even save my sister. I couldn't finish college. I'm nobody special. Amelia stepped forward and took his hands, her manicured fingers wrapping around his weathered ones, and the contrast was striking. Soft and hard, polished and raw, success and struggle meeting in a gesture that transcended every social barrier. Thomas Chen, you are the reason 2.7 million people have had someone to talk to in their darkest moments. You are the reason Safe Harbor exists. You are the reason I'm alive. You're not nobody. You're the foundation of everything good I've built. She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd pitched to boards and spoken at conferences and refused to be diminished. This man, who you all walk past every day, who you might buy a hot dog from without making eye contact, saved my life with nothing but kindness. He gave me his last $20 when he was working 3 jobs. He stood in the rain for 3 hours with a stranger when he could have just walked home. He is the definition of a hero, someone who helps without expectation of reward or recognition. The crowd erupted in applause, but Amelia raised her hand for silence. She wasn't finished. Thomas, I need to tell you what I've been planning. Safe Harbor is launching a new initiative called the Bridge Walker Foundation. It's designed to support people like you, those who give everything to help others but struggle themselves. The foundation will have an initial endowment of $100 million. Thomas staggered backward, his mind unable to process the number. Around them, people gasped and phones flashed and reporters pushed closer. But Amelia continued with the calm certainty of someone who'd thought through every detail. But that's not why I'm here, she said. I'm here because I owe you a debt that money can't repay. You saved my life, but more than that, you showed me how to save others. Every feature in Safe Harbor comes from something you taught me that night. The peer connection system? That's you sharing your sister's story. The 24-hour availability? That's you stopping at 2 in the morning when you could have kept walking. The emphasis on human connection over clinical intervention? That's you treating me like a person, not a problem. Thomas wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his stained vendor uniform, trying to compose himself. I don't want money, he said quietly. That's not. I didn't help you for money. I know, Amelia replied. That's exactly why you deserve everything good that can come from this. But there's something else. She pulled out another phone, this one showing a video that made Thomas's knees buckle completely. It was his sister Emma, recorded days before she died, thin and bald but smiling as she spoke to the camera. Tommy, Emma's voice filled the air, somehow crystal clear despite the crowd. If you're watching this, it means I'm gone and you're probably blaming yourself for not saving me. Stop it. You gave me 3 extra years by dropping out of school, by working yourself to death, by being there every single day. You're the best brother anyone could ask for. Promise me something. Don't let my death be the end of your story. Help someone else. Be for them what you were for me. Love doesn't die with the person, Tommy. It just looks for new places to grow. Thomas collapsed to his knees, mirroring Amelia's earlier position, sobbing as his sister's voice washed over him. He'd never seen this video, never knew it existed. Amelia knelt beside him, and for a moment they were just two people who'd known loss, who'd stood at the edge of ending, who'd found reasons to continue. Your neighbor had it, Amelia explained softly. Mrs. Rodriguez from your old building in Queens. When my investigators were looking for you, they interviewed everyone who'd known you. She'd been holding on to it, hoping to find you again. She said Emma made her promise to show it to you when you were ready to hear it. The crowd had gone completely silent, many crying openly as they witnessed something raw and real and utterly human. Here was grief and grace, loss and love, all playing out on a Manhattan street corner between a billionaire and a hot dog vendor who'd once saved each other without knowing it. She'd be so proud, Amelia whispered. You did exactly what she asked. You helped someone else. You were for me what you'd been for her. Thomas looked up through his tears at the woman in the red dress. This stranger who wasn't a stranger. This success story that had started with his kindness. And he saw Emma in her smile. Not literally, but spiritually, that same determination to make pain mean something, to transform suffering into purpose. I fed those cats, he said suddenly, the non sequitur making Amelia laugh through her own tears. Even when I was living in my van, even when I had nothing, I fed those cats. Because you can't wait until you have enough to start helping. You have to help with whatever you have, whenever you can. Yes, Amelia said, gripping his hands tighter. That's exactly right. That's what you taught me. That's what Safe Harbor teaches millions. Help with what you have, when you can, however you can. The police had cordoned off the entire block, creating a perimeter around what was becoming the most viral moment in New York City's recent history. News helicopters circled overhead while reporters from every major network tried to push through for interviews. But inside the circle, Amelia and Thomas sat on the curb beside his hot dog cart, talking as if they were the only two people in Manhattan. I need to show you something, Amelia said, pulling up her phone again. The screen showed a building, a gorgeous brownstone in Brooklyn with a small garden in front. I bought this 2 years ago. It's been sitting empty because I couldn't figure out what to do with it. Now I know. It's yours. Thomas shook his head immediately. I can't accept that. That's too much. I don't need. It's not for you, Amelia interrupted gently. Well, not just for you. Look at the plans. She swiped through architectural drawings showing the brownstone converted into something beautiful. A street-level community kitchen, apartments above for people transitioning out of homelessness, a garden designed specifically for the neighborhood cats, the Thomas Chen Center for Community Care, a place where people who are struggling can get a meal, a shower, maybe a bed for a night, run by someone who understands what it's like to have nothing but still want to help. The crowd, which had been listening intently, burst into spontaneous applause. Someone shouted, "You deserve it, Tom." Another voice called out, "We love you, hot dog man." Thomas looked around, stunned to see faces he recognized. Customers who bought from him daily, people who usually rushed past without acknowledgement, all looking at him with something new in their eyes. Respect, admiration, recognition. "But there's more," Amelia continued, and her tone shifted to something more serious. "Thomas, I need to tell you about that night from my perspective. You see, I wasn't just standing on that bridge because of the scholarship and the eviction. There was something else." She paused, gathering courage for a revelation she'd never shared publicly. "I'd been assaulted the week before, by someone I trusted, someone powerful at the university who made it clear that reporting him would end my academic career." A hush fell over the crowd. Thomas's face darkened with protective anger, the same instinct that had made him approach a stranger on a bridge 7 years ago. "I felt so powerless," Amelia continued, "like my body wasn't mine, my future wasn't mine, my voice didn't matter. But then you appeared. This stranger who had every reason to keep walking, who was exhausted and broke and grieving, and you stopped. You talked to me like I was worth saving. You didn't know about the assault, but you said something about your sister that changed everything. You said, 'Emma taught me that surviving isn't about being strong all the time. It's about being strong for the next 5 minutes, and then the next 5 until suddenly you've survived the whole night.'" She pulled up another screen on her phone. A news article from 3 years ago. The headline read, "Columbia professor sentenced to 15 years after multiple victims come forward." Below was a picture of the man who'd assaulted her, being led away in handcuffs. "I survived in 5-minute increments for 2 years, Amelia said. Built safe harbor in 5-minute increments. Got therapy in 5-minute increments. And eventually, I was strong enough to speak up. When I did, 17 other women came forward. He's in prison now, and Columbia has completely reformed its reporting system. All because a hot dog vendor taught me about 5-minute survival." Thomas reached out hesitantly, then pulled Amelia into a hug, the first real human contact either had allowed themselves in this entire encounter. The crowd cheered, but it was background noise to the moment of genuine connection between two people who'd saved each other across years and circumstances. When they pulled apart, Thomas noticed something in the crowd. A familiar face pushing through the police line. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, his elderly former neighbor from Queens, the one who'd saved Emma's video. She was crying and carrying something in her arms. "Tommy," she called out. "Tommy Chun, you beautiful boy. I knew you'd become something special." She reached them and thrust what she was carrying into his hands. A photo album, worn and yellowed with age. "Emma made me promise to give this to you when you'd found your purpose. She said I'd know when it was time." Thomas opened the album with shaking hands. It was filled with pictures he'd never seen. Emma in the hospital, yes, but smiling, laughing, surrounded by the nurses and doctors Thomas had charmed into giving her extra care. There were pictures of him sleeping in hospital chairs, exhausted from his multiple jobs. Pictures of him reading to her, bringing her favorite foods, dancing with her to music only they could hear. And on the last page, a note in Emma's handwriting. "To whoever Tommy saves, because I know he will thank you for seeing in him what I always saw, a hero disguised as an ordinary man. He'll deny it, say he's nobody special, but don't believe him. He's the kind of person who changes the world one kindness at a time. Take care of him the way he took care of me. He deserves to be saved too. Emma Chen. The note destroyed whatever composure Thomas had left. He broke down completely, clutching the album to his chest, years of suppressed grief and guilt finally finding release. Amelia held him while he sobbed, this reversal of roles feeling like the completion of a circle that had taken 7 years to close. She knew, Thomas whispered. Emma knew I'd save someone. How did she know? Because she knew you, Amelia replied. She saw who you really were, even when you couldn't see it yourself. As Thomas composed himself, Amelia stood and addressed the crowd one more time. I want everyone here to understand something. We walk past heroes every day. The man serving your coffee might have talked someone off a ledge last night. The woman cleaning your office might be supporting 3 families. The vendor you ignore might be the reason someone else is alive. Thomas Chen saved me without knowing my name, without expecting anything, without even remembering it as particularly important. That's true heroism. Doing good because it's right, not because it's rewarded. The sun had reached its zenith over Manhattan, bathing the entire scene in brilliant light that made Amelia's red dress glow like a flame and highlighted the tears still glistening on Thomas's weathered face. The crowd had grown to over 1,000 people, with more arriving every minute as the live stream of their encounter spread across every social media platform. But in this moment, something shifted. The story was no longer just about 2 people reuniting, but about something larger, something that touched everyone watching. I have one more thing to show you, Amelia said, gesturing to someone in the crowd. A young man emerged, probably 25, wearing a Safe Harbor t-shirt and carrying a tablet. Thomas, this is Marcus. He's alive because of you, though you've never met. Marcus approached shyly, clearly overwhelmed by the situation. Mr. Chen, 2 years ago I was on the Williamsburg Bridge at 3 in the morning. I'd lost my job, my apartment, everything. I opened Safe Harbor as a last resort, and the first thing I saw was a story about a man who fed stray cats even when he couldn't feed himself. That story, your story, though I didn't know it was you, made me realize that if someone could find purpose in feeding cats, maybe I could find purpose too. Thomas looked stunned as Marcus continued. I volunteer for Safe Harbor now. I've talked 847 people through their worst nights using what you taught Amelia, what she built into the app. Your kindness 7 years ago has rippled out to save thousands of lives. Mr. Chen, you're not just a hero, you're the origin point of a revolution in how we care for each other. More people began stepping forward from the crowd, each with their own connection to Safe Harbor, their own story of survival. A middle-aged teacher who'd been saved by the app after her divorce. A teenager who'd found hope through a peer counselor. A veteran who'd connected with others who understood his struggles. They formed a circle around Thomas and Amelia, living proof that one act of kindness could multiply infinitely. This is what you started, Amelia told Thomas, gesturing to all the faces around them. Every person here, every life saved through Safe Harbor, every moment of connection between strangers. It all traces back to you stopping on a bridge 7 years ago. You thought you were nobody, but you were everybody's somebody. You were the stranger who cared. Thomas stood slowly, looking around at the faces surrounding him. No longer anonymous pedestrians, but a community united by shared understanding of how fragile and precious life could be. His hot dog cart, which had seemed like a symbol of his failure just an hour ago, now stood as a monument to the dignity of ordinary work and extraordinary compassion. I want to tell you all something, Thomas said, his voice carrying despite its quietness. I'm not special. I'm really not. But maybe that's the point. If someone like me, a college dropout, a guy who lives in a van who couldn't save his own sister, if I could save someone just by stopping and caring, then anyone can. Everyone can. You don't need money or success or anything except the willingness to see someone else's pain and sit with them in it. He turned to Amelia, who was crying again but smiling through her tears. You say I saved you, but the truth is you saved me too. For 7 years, I've wondered if Emma's death meant my life was just about loss. But you've shown me it was about learning how to recognize pain, how to respond to it, how to transform it. You took the worst night of your life and built something that helps millions. That's not just survival, that's alchemy. Amelia pulled out one last thing from her purse. A set of keys. Thomas, I know you want to keep working, to keep being who you are. But you don't have to do it from a van anymore. The brownstone has an owner's apartment. It's yours, no strings, no conditions. And if you want to keep running your hot dog cart, that's beautiful. But you'll have a home to return to. A place to rest. A base from which to do even more good. Thomas took the keys with trembling hands, feeling their weight. Not just physical but symbolic. For 7 years, he'd been homeless in various degrees. Sleeping in his van, showering at the gym, existing on the margins of a city that barely saw him. Now he was being offered not just shelter but purpose. Not just a house but a home for others like him. There's one condition, Thomas said suddenly, and Amelia raised an eyebrow. The cats come with me. All 7 of them. They're my family now. Amelia laughed, bright and genuine. The brownstone has a garden specifically designed for them. I told you I researched everything about you. Those cats are as much a part of this story as we are. As the crowd began to disperse, returning to their lives but carrying with them a story that would change how they saw every stranger, Thomas and Amelia stood together beside his hot dog cart. The vendor and the billionaire, the saved and the savior, though it was impossible now to say which was which. What happens now? Thomas asked, still overwhelmed by the transformation of his life in a single morning. Now you continue being exactly who you are, Amelia replied. A man who sees suffering and responds with kindness. A man who gives what he has, even when it's almost nothing. A man who proves every day that heroism isn't about grand gestures but about small choices to care. She pulled out her phone one last time, showing him the Safe Harbor interface. At the bottom, where it had always said, 4TC, who saved a stranger in the rain, there was now a new addition. Thomas Chen, the bridge walker who showed us all how to help each other home. Every person who opens this app will know your name now, Amelia said. Not for fame but for hope. So they know that the stranger who helps them might be someone who's struggled too. Someone who understands. Someone who chose to transform their pain into purpose. As the sun began its descent over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, Thomas Chen stood beside his hot dog cart, which he would keep running, because serving people had always been his calling, and felt Emma's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. He'd kept his promise to her. He'd helped someone, and in helping that someone, he'd helped millions. Amelia walked away eventually, returning to her world of board meetings and billion-dollar decisions, but not before programming her number into Thomas's phone. A real number this time. Not just a lifeline thrown to a stranger, but a connection between friends who'd saved each other across time and circumstance. That night, Thomas Chen unlocked the door to his new home for the first time. 7 cats following him inside, and found it already furnished with photos. Pictures from Safe Harbor users around the world, each one holding a sign that said, "Thank you, Bridge Walker." In the center of them all was a portrait of Emma, smiling, with a plaque beneath it that read, Emma Chen, whose love for her brother started a revolution of kindness that saved the world. One conversation at a time. Thomas fed his cats in his new kitchen, then sat at his new table and opened the Safe Harbor app. There were 17 people waiting to talk to someone who understood what it was like to lose everything and still choose to continue. He clicked on the first one, a young man in Portland standing on a bridge in the rain, and began typing, "Hi, I'm Thomas. I know things seem impossible right now, but can you give me 5 minutes? Just 5 minutes to tell you about my sister Emma, and some stray cats, and why your life matters more than you know." And so the circle continued, kindness rippling outward in waves that would never stop moving. All because one night, 7 years ago, a tired man chose to stop for a stranger in the rain and prove that love is stronger than loss, that hope is stronger than despair, and that sometimes the person everyone ignores is exactly the hero the world needs most.